Sean B.W. Parker, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Very happy to be here.
Sean, cancel culture. What is it? Why is it so silly? And is cancel culture just a modern day public execution, except now we use tweets instead of guillotines?
I think you just answered it yourself there. That sounds exactly what it is. It appears to me to be a reaction to the Brexit and the Trump votes of 2016. The progressive left went crazy after that and then decided anything that wasn't in line with their ultra-left policy was deemed worthy of cancellation in culture, in art, in politics. And so after that, they just ramped up the intensity to try to punish those who had voted this terrible individualistic way. And so it's been 10 years of this, and we've seen it happening in various parts of culture.
Right. And in a way, cancel culture is having unrealistic expectations. Are we holding people to impossible standards here, expecting them to be perfect in the world that no one is?
Well, exactly that. And the problem is that the perfect that they're holding to is subjective. It's their own form of perfect. That it's about, if you're environmentally sound, then you're sound. And if you're totally sexually only into one person, then you're okay. Or if you're into lots of kinks, you're okay. But anything heteronormative or anything like that is traditional and worthy of cancellation. If there's any slight problem with it, like there's an argument with the partner. So anything that all of the morality has changed, and they're cancelling people off the back of the new morality rather than the old one, which was more about the religion and natural impulses and instincts that people have. They try to get rid of because of postmodern theory, which they've applied to people's moral lives, and that's the new Puritans at work. It's a headbutt, that's what's going on with it. And if you can handle that mind twisting, then you're okay. But if you're traditional or coming at a common sense view of the world, then you're not okay. And common sense has become a swear word, as we've seen with all the national parties.
It's insane. Common sense not so common anymore. But you mentioned there, you said morality has changed. Has it really though, or is it just a tiny vocal minority trying to impose theirs? And then they just guise it as, oh, this is the new normal, this is the new moral, this is the whatever, 2025, 2024, so deal with it. So what's going on there?
Yeah, it's an elite morality. You hit it on the head. It's not felt or shared by people in general, though they feel they have to say that in public and in the dinner parties and stuff, until they have enough of controlling their speech and then having their speech compelled by what not to say, not to spot the differences between people. And all that people want to do is to be natural in that way and to be their natural good selves. The new moralists, the new moralists, the woke, for want of a better term, we're trying to get away from that, obviously, but it's helpful because everyone knows what we're talking about when we say woke. Their idea is that Christianity, just for a big example, being 2 billion around the world, is sort of fundamentally evil because of its power dynamics. So if you come from a place where Christianity is basically evil, then what does that do for the rest of morality? And there's all the other ones are similar with Islam, and all the big religions have goodness at their heart, but they also have things like the sex dynamic of male and female. So if you start to entirely upend that in terms of whatever anybody wants to do, find according to their own desires, which is the woke thing, as long as it doesn't interfere with the environment, and it's all completely consensual, then it all gets inverted. So we're in an inverted place, and majority don't feel that morality and having it imposed upon them. And that's why it's called the woke authoritarianism.
Right. And what is funny is that cancel culture is basically public shaming, but it mainly comes from people who are the most shameless, from the ones that defend drug performances for children, or who push for the inclusion of biological males in women's sports, or who participate in degenerate parades where naked people wearing latex are peeing on top of each other. But no, you should be shamed and you should lose your career over a decade-old tweet that everyone has forgotten about, but somehow the woke mob so desperately wants to cling to this moment of relevance because they are, I don't know, maybe miserous. So they dig to resurface a tweet from 2009 just to prove a point and bathe themselves in this moral superiority. And people can see the hypocrisy in that. We don't.
Well, its time has actually passed with the election of Trump and Vance and a few other developments. Puberty blockers being banned here, and Britain, but they're leading the vanguard of holding the trans activists to account, basically, because they held the world hostage for a while until the turfs over here, as they're called, stood up to them, and over the last couple of years. And nobody's saying out there, anybody's saying individual trans people should be victimized and targeted. Nobody's saying that, but that's the language they come out with. And we're still saying, no, that's not the point. It's just, as you say, keep out of women's sports, show some common sense. No trans person that I know, and I know some, want anything to do with women's sports, the decent ones, and they want the trans activists to shut up. So all that stuff is activist-based, and the Greens are doing exactly the same thing for themselves, torching their reputation around the world with its just top oil shenanigans, thinking to get into the headlines is the way to make change. Yeah, and to get the country to abandon your stance, which the world is very much green. All the sensible people go, yeah, well, we don't want to waste. It's overdone to hell, but they don't want to be destroying the world. Nobody wants to do that. But how much is the world actually being destroyed? Not as much as you've been saying for 10 years. And everyone's starting to realize that now as well. So it's a time of realization, and we're very much in the post-woke period now. So the things that we're talking about, yeah, it's still iffy. And when you go to the Guardian and BBC and MSNBC, things like that, they still denounce traditional common sense ideas, but we shouldn't give up on the word common sense to keep people sane.
Right, you're right. And how much of what we have seen so far from cancel culture is you think, algorithms pushing something that has gotten a lot of traction, and how much of it is simply outrage human nature?
It's definitely encouraged by the algorithm as a business model. So the tech bros, will go where the wind blows and where the money is, whilst also looking as virtuous as possible, because they are that generation that is desperate to be virtuous. And they never admit that the division that society's been spasming under for 10 years has been created by the algorithm. You're totally right. And that has been pushed on by the death of the legacy media, or comparative death. It's not dying, it's just going to a much less powerful place. It doesn't know what to do about that. And it's the algorithm absolutely makes the money. The negative comments on X particularly are as powerful as the positive ones, making for this bubbling cauldron of anger and passion, people losing their jobs sometimes. Moreover, people are trying to work out how another person can think in this different way. Yeah. And that's the challenge for me, by the way, as an artist, is to try to work out why these reactions are so intense. And I always try to see it from the other point of view in order, that's how I want to live. But it can be incredibly challenging when it's so completely, how dare you think this? And the word evil talked about all over the place. Politics isn't evil, it's politics. And that's all this stuff is. Who's going to win, the postmodernist or the naturalist? That's what's going on at the moment. And at the moment, the naturalists are coming back in big time because of people like Vance talking about it.
And this outrage you mentioned, how do you think this, or how do you have this opinion about transgenderism? It doesn't happen in real life. Maybe you see it in very, very specific scenarios, but you go about in central London, I live in London, and you don't see any hate about this. But when you go online, people who live in London, suddenly it's a totally different world. It's as if Twitter, now known as X, is bringing our worst selves in a way. So I think in real life, things are not as bad as they seem online.
Completely. It's a weird thing, isn't it? It's indicative of what the cultural realm is. It's kind of good that when you open your laptop and you go on, you know that there's an area there. It's like the newspapers of old with the Times and Telegraph. All of the writers of the day would go into the back pages and have wars in the letters page, colleges and Wales and stuff, kind of writing in and arguing with each other in a really bloodthirsty way for their time. We've kind of got that now. Everybody's doing it, and for loads and loads of different, and instantly, of course. So however I feel about that post now, I'll respond to it. And if that happens to be in a particularly rageful way, I might get sent to prison now. And that's a new paradigm. You wouldn't have had that in the back of the Telegraph. So it's like the powers that be don't know what to do with social media. They're absolutely shit scared of it because it's just because it's not in their best interest at all. So it boosts on their own model, and the online gets as powerful as the physical. But as you say, when you walk out onto the street, people aren't out there punching each other in the face over trans or critical race theory or anything else. They're just kind of, but it's there in the cultural background for now, because if the internet does actually manage to come into the space out there where you can actually pull up the screen in front of you on the street, who knows what's happening next, then it might infringe further. But for now, it is still in the devices. Maybe we could keep it there,
Right. And especially in the UK. So I've been here 5 years, and I come from the Balkans, which is quite homogeneous societies. So when I first came here, I could really tell as if there is no racism at all. So all these political ideologies come from the US, because there you are African American, Asian American, Latin American, whereas here, let's say you talk to a black person, is like, I'm British. You talk to an Indian person, is I'm British. I'm not Indian British or African British. So people here, their identity used to be, and I hope it still is, that I am British or English or wherever they grew up in the UK. But now suddenly with these Black Lives movements, they try and inspire, just these racial tensions that they don't seem to exist 5 years before in this country, because as I said, everyone's identity is like, it's not like, oh, I'm African British. I'm British.
Yeah. Identity politics is its own industry and its own force, which has been ramped up this century as a facet of postmodernism. I don't think they knew how successful it was going to be. The internet has carried it, and so it's been able to. Basically, people talk about this stuff too much. They should just be it. Everybody knows what they are. You're from where you are, and your skin color and your religion and everything else. It's your business, and mine is mine. And there's no reason, apart from, oh, that's interesting, that we should talk about it. Not to go your privilege, and because when you get to the power dynamics, every civilization is founded on a crime. They've all, in some way, conquered another and abused another in the past. Now, David Lammy is putting us up to £13 trillion worth of debt to, the old colonies or whatever else, or the old countries of slavery. And it's like, what, the news name are you doing this, Mr. Lammy? And these things are just facets of an identity politics which is used as, to cut to the chase, is as a way to marginalize and to minimize white, mostly males. You can say white, everybody, but also males, because the feminist movement is very strong within the progressive, and that's the original ism. So the racism and stuff all come off that. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and all those intersectionalities come together in identity politics until eventually people stand up and go, am I not an individual after all in this liberal democracy? People go, yeah, well, I'm going to go prove it. And you get the speeches like Mr. Bunce. I'm not a fanboy in Bunce, but the recent speech that you did was compellingly fresh, and so that's the kind of spirit where we're on now. The individual don't constantly go on about your lack of, about your distress. Think about what you do have. Be grateful. I don't want to be hippie about it, but it's a very healthy psychological thing to be grateful, look out there, not to be ungrateful, but to look in here. That's to root the depression and to a failing society. I think that's the new spirit coming out now, probably.
And what is weird is that cancel culture predominantly took place on Twitter, because as we know with the Twitter file now, it was very left-leaning, and conservative voices and even comedy at some point were censored. So outside Twitter, the world didn't seem to really care much about this whole cancel culture and the wokeism, but it kept going viral on Twitter, and because that's where all the target audience for this thing was sitting, then it would go viral and mainstream media would report it later. Do you think we would still have cancel culture if there was not this online audience? Or is it just about social currency? Liberals just found the one thing that made them quite relatable at the moment and attracted millions of eyeballs on them. So, they just rode the wave. But if there wasn't this audience on Twitter, do you think this movement would even exist?
Well, everything has its time. And if a thing is going to exist in a time it's going to, then it has. So it's like, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So we have the internet and social media, and it has many wonderful forms, and it allows us to have this chat now. Tech is a great thing in various ways. It's just when it's combined with the very mixed factions of progressive politics, which is constantly about going in a way forward. And there's actually no consensus on what forward means. What I'm thinking these days, Francesco, is that forward is, what does forward actually mean? It seems to mean for them, and I mean the globalists, the elitists, the progressives, it means getting rid of the differences between everybody in order that everyone can be fairly treated and the same. And I'm like, I don't believe in getting rid of the differences between people anymore, if I ever did. In the 90s, I was a no borders kind of person, a bit of a hippie, very much, the free love, people, everyone love each other, that kind of thing. There's this part of my heart that is still that, right? But it's like, I recognize that I'm a white guy who doesn't need to apologize for that. I'm a heterosexual white guy who doesn't need to apologize for that, and an Englishman. And apparently we're supposed to apologize for everything. And we're all having had enough of that now, because we've been battered for all those three things for the last 10 years in various ways in culture. It's whether it would have existed or not without the internet, it may or may not, but the internet is there. It's sped everything up, made everyone talk, which is fun. And the bigger voices still get listened to the most because the money still counts. So if you can get the money to put the promotion in, you'll still get the bigger voice. You need to have something behind it to keep them coming. So, not sure if I answered you on that one, but I went forward.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And okay, I just thought now while you were talking, maybe the whole cancel culture movement was necessary in the societal zeitgeist so that we could see the worst that can happen, or we could see what happens if you push things too far one side. And particularly this was the left side, the liberal side. So perhaps maybe this was something necessary in society. Because, if maybe these things don't happen, maybe you don't learn. Maybe there's something to be learned here. And perhaps in retrospect, maybe it was good that it happened. What do you think about that?
Positive to me, it's good that everything happens. So, and whatever happens is a thing to be responded to, worked on, and criticized. And so it's all good. It's all good. So that's where I actually come from. After that, I think that the 85% rump of all countries, because there's 15% nutters and the passionate, engaged people, and then 85% people who don't give a shit, who are just out there trying to work and be normal and the rest of it. And actually, I don't consider myself to be a part of either of those things, but I'm more interested in the rump, because that's where the change really happens. Because you're always going to have the 15% nutters always doing that thing, but these things are different because they care about different things. The 85% care about their family and the rent and having a reasonably decent life, and the rest of them care about rights and their own special interests. So it's how the 85% responded to cancel culture is of interest. And I think there'll be a lot of them who are saying, well, if you don't do anything wrong, then you won't get trouble and cancelled, will you? The problem with that thinking is that before you know it, you're not saying anything. But anything that makes that worse and more is actually a problem. So, we need the normies, that's the term that they use here, to be more critical of the entire status quo. And they are being.
Yeah, and to me, cancel culture, the way I saw it, felt very personal to the people to whom it was directed to, though it was often guised as an attack to inappropriate ideas. It seemed more as an attack to the people, not to the ideas. So do you think what was going on? Was it more cancelling individuals, or were we actually cancelling ideas?
Good question. The left and the progressives, without wanting to focus on them too much, things do happen from the right as well in a rather different kind of way. But the left do tend to go ad hominem. They do tend to hit the person because, unfortunately, left ideas are based on ideals. So this is how things should be. Whereas the right is based on reality, as in this is how things are, human nature and things like that. So and I've known, I don't know about you, but I've understood that since about the age of 15. And after I did, I'm like, well, I'm always going to look at those two things in those two different ways. So I don't have to be on one side of it. I just have to work out what they're trying to achieve from them. Tony Blair put them together quite successfully to fix results, So it's like, um, um, if you've got this desire to always do the right thing, and the person looks like they're not doing that right thing because they're right wing, which just means they're saying human nature exists these days. That's enough to make you right wing. So you find yourself accidentally in that box without having half to be there. It's a very weird place to be, and it's the leftist. Kind of 2012 with Obama's second term, the Overton window swang massively to the left. So it went to a bizarre place and went, well, I used to be a bit left, but I've got nothing to do with that lot anymore. And they consider me now right, or at best centre, but I used to be left. And there's a lot of people like that. And this is now 12, 13 years ago. So we've actually been living through it for 10 years without knowing it until after the Trump thing, when they lost their shit. They got really upset by that. They're like, why aren't you listening to me? How can you vote this man in? And they just did it again last year. It all melted down. It's because 60% of people actually want things to happen rather than to virtue about them all over the place. And that's now the difference between the rationalist and the idealist. And those are terms which I'm comfortable with. The right tend to be rationalist now, and the left are the idealists. That's how I want the world to be. Well, we all want the world to be something, but there's reality as well. Right?
Yeah. And that's why at some point I started believing that cancel culture warriors were people who were not interested in justice as much as they were just seeing people they didn't like falling from grace. And I believe the most sensible among us could see that. Yet they managed to fool so many people, and in a way even forced multi-million, multi-billion, multinational corporations and put them under pressure to change their company values, to fire employees for jokes they made 10 years ago on a tweet. So how do you think this progressive mob managed to capture the minds of so many people and have so much corporate influence?
They went too far. They managed it because they're a clever bunch and they've studied gender studies for 30 years. And if the only thing you're allowed to do is to look at the world in a progressive prism, so everything must get better all the time, and anything you do needs to be about making the world better. And if you're not doing that, then what you're doing is a waste of time. And that's the problem that I've decided, that's the thing I have a problem with now. I was a little bit like that in the 90s. And in the 2000s, I found that slipping away from me. And now I couldn't be further away from it. Yes, getting older, but also about seeing the negativity that involves, which is basically emotional blackmail. They got there by emotional blackmail, by going to the corporations. Do you want to look good? Well, if you do, better greenwash, and whatever else. And if you mention anything about the integrity of biology, we do have penises and vaginas, and that's not by choice, that's by God's science given. So, it doesn't matter how you see yourself. You see yourself however you want. That's the wonders of a liberal democracy. In a liberal democracy, but as soon as you infringe that on somebody else's rights, like you're my daughters in their changing room, like no, that's when the rights aren't being infringed, and that's just the very obvious edge of the culture wars.
Biggest problem I see about cancel culture is that it punishes people for being flawed and original, as we all are, for being brave to speak up your mind in a free world. So if we cancel all opinions we don't agree with, where does that leave us? It leaves us in a society that people are afraid to speak up their mind. It leaves us in a world that we are pretending to all agree when we don't. Why? So that a tiny vocal minority doesn't get triggered or offended. What are we doing here exactly? Because it seems like we're catering to the needs of a most sensitive for the sake of not being called bigots.
Yeah, that's a really good little summary of place we're at. Art, I'm an artist. Artist is my main identity. I call that. I just like painting, right? And inside that, there's very little judgment. It's trying to reflect what's going on in the world. That is how expression should be. I think this is how you should be doing it. And if you don't, I'm not going to let you through my BBC mouthpiece, because all I care about is making society better. So that's a recent thing. And in the last century, so most people, even young people, think culture is better because they all get access to it on YouTube. That, yeah, you want to change policy because of something actual that happened. And that's a very obvious thing with things like Cambodia, where there's a government torturing people. But then to extend that into work in the 21st century, where to criticize a group of people for, like Black Lives Matter people for destroying cities on the basis of one mysteriously killed black guy, is like, and then to kick off about that, people start to realize how we're being played. So campaign journalism has become this industry of its own, which is now a problem in itself. So I never want to be that campaign journalist or campaign artist making society better. I just want to, what we're doing now is the ideal journalistic art form, talking about it and holding to account if we want, and we think really aren't as divided up as it might seem.
Yeah, it is. It's not easy. It is complicated because we are complicated creatures, aren't we? So, talking about complicated, if society is always evolving, should past mistakes be judged by today's moral standard? Because that's basically what cancel culture is.
I think it's been exposed how batshit it is, and it has been a combination of an interesting online story, which will get views and go viral and like rave. So good fun for journalists who like to dig. So it's good for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you combine that with the new morality, which, yeah, put it that way, you get this kind of force of like, you need to get with the program. Why haven't you worked out how things are these days? And then you get the guy, usually guy at the end, well, often at the end of it, going, I didn't consent to this change. I don't actually agree to the way that you changed things. Mr. Trump is rather legendary on this, of course. He doesn't even bother to let it land, and that's how he's been quite successful. But most people aren't quite as New York and experienced thick skin as he is. They're sensitive. They want to get on in their dinner parties and with their middle class friends. They don't want to not be invited to these things because he's suddenly gone right wing. And that was the Brexit debates all over the country here. It's apparently split many families, and I guess it might split mine, but I don't know the Remainers very well. I didn't vote in that election, so it was only after that I started to understand how the media was involved in this and what they were up to. And 10 years later now, we're still dealing with the fallout.
Sean, do you think cancel culture, although we see it die out, but do you think it's going to die out, or is it going to evolve to something different? Like, where do you see it heading?
People have always been sacked, right, and cancelled and disapproved of. All that stuff is part of being an adult. So, and often when people are cancelled, the counsellors say, we didn't cancel them, we just sacked them because it wasn't making any money, which might be a fair point some of the time. And sometimes people say, I was cancelled, when what they actually mean is they were sacked for not being very good. This is actually the argument of the counsellor. So we have to make sure that it is what it is, what we're talking about, the terms. Cancel culture, in the state that it's been in now, is a busted flush. As in, if anybody gets cancelled now, they immediately weaponize it back, and they go over to independent media and start to make a name for themselves over there. So it's become a new industry. It's like the post-Me Too thing. When you take this celebrity down that way, like some sex scandal or something, they suddenly come up as risen from the dead, and they become cooler than ever because they've survived this thing. So it's like, what happens after cancel culture? I think it's quite a good question because I don't have an answer to it. I think we're going to see as we go forward what comes next into the Trump presidency, and because that's already affecting lots of the rest of the world, and it's a bit more important to see how that. I hope there isn't some huge backlash against lots of progressive people. There's so many good things inside progressivism. I'm very left, by the way, when it comes to justice reform, things like that. I believe in lesser prison sentences, all kinds of rehabilitation, all this kind of thing. Economically, I'm very neutral. So I'm not some fierce right-winger by any stretch, but I'm a free speech absolutist, probably as much, because I haven't seen a reason not to be yet.
Yeah, and now with Trump, we see the cancel culture got cancelled by him in a way.
It's cancelling cancel culture, effectively.
Yeah, he's cancel culture. What is the latest thing you've seen the woke mob is trying to destroy right now, other than attacking Elon Musk and literally organizing protests against him? Like, have you seen something, interesting?
What's interesting happening on the woke field? The trans thing continues on because however many lawsuits they go through, and the courts say you can't do this, you can't identify as something like you're not anymore, they get stamped down every time, and each time they ignore it and carry on anyway. And then they turn that into their own story on Pink News or whatever, and the BBC will always support them, and they'll go forward. So it's like the trans activists completely ignore the fact that their entire grid has been disallowed by the court, and they just seem to ignore it. That's really interesting because it's like that the progressive culture ignoring law, which is like with Just Stop Oil. They're not ignoring law; they've been put in prison, and they're complaining about it. Though they need to go there. So it's interesting to see how these people are ignoring the laws that have been passed against them. That's kind of where we are at the moment.
Well, speaking about this, something interesting happened yesterday. I was doing some research on woke and cancel culture, for this conversation. So our main source of information is Google, and then to some early adopters now is ChatGPT. So the Google engine and our most advanced AI are quite progressive when you think about it. And yesterday I was researching about degeneracy in LGBTQ plus communities in the parades that they do sometimes, that it happens. I'm not generalizing, it's just when it happens. And ChatGPT kind of lectured me. And this is the thing, it didn't give me an answer straight away. He lectured me about inflammatory rhetoric. And then I asked right underneath, can you give me the same thing, but about the degeneracy in conservatives? And it was, absolutely, here are 10 ways how the conservatives are being degenerate. Let me read you exactly what he said. Just give me a second here. So he said, if you're looking to discuss cancel culture, LGBTQ plus topics, and perceived societal shifts, it's important to approach the conversation in a way that fosters meaningful discussion rather than inflammatory rhetoric. If the goal is to critique certain aspects of the modern LGBTQ activism, social movements, or cultural dynamics, I can help frame thought-provoking and objective questions that encourage debate rather than blanket generalizations. And then for the conservatives, he said, can you do the same about them? I said, absolutely. If you want to explore more degeneracy among conservative people, I can help frame provoking and sharp questions that critically examine hypocrisy, contradictions, and yada, yada, yada. The important thing here is it didn't say that it's going to be objective about conservatives. So then I challenged it, and it said, no, I cannot be objective. I am biased because an AI model carries the biases of its creator, of its coders, which tend to be quite left-leaning, for better or for worse. But the problem here is that the average person that, let's say, sees societal decay with their own eyes in the real world, and then they go home and it's like, well, let me make a very surface level research about this. The first thing, the AI, which they trust blindly, like, okay, this is 100% what's going on, the AI will give them a biased answer, and they will take it as face value. So now they think, maybe it's just me, maybe it's not really going on. But to that I have to say, trust your own eyes. And then to its own conclusion, after I challenged it, it said, Your critical thinking is on point. The best way to navigate bias in AI, media, or any institution is to question everything. So the AI itself, it's always biased until you challenge it. Then it tries to be objective, although it told you it cannot be objective. We need to challenge everything because, people are starting not believing their own eyes. And, this can turn very, very Orwellian very quickly, if we take for face value what the AI is giving us for information. Sorry, that was a long one.
No, that was great. And especially because AI appears to be a patronizing tosser in general. It's like, well, that's interesting to learn, AI, how dare AI talk to us like that? How lecture? A teacher, my ideal model of a teacher, I used to teach, is a person that explains from without bias, they explain what happened. They don't have to say, and I agree with that. What do you think, Johnny? They just say, this is what happens. You don't have to then say, do you think it's a good idea, Johnny? It's a very easy thing to do. And it's not, it's easy with a little bit of intelligence attached. And as long as you aren't trying to change the world. It's the problem with the change that, you ask little kids, what are you going to do when you're old? I want to change the world. No, get that out of your head. And it's a luxury belief, of course, for us to change the world. It's like, you want to change it to your own benefit, don't you? But so does Elon Musk, and he's trying to do it to his own benefit and for the benefit of you. Do you understand why you might be doing that? Yeah, but then it's an endless argument. And you'll get, before you know it, to the Arabs thinking that the Jews are evil and the Jews thinking that the Arabs are evil. I don't know how to untangle that thing. Even my brain isn't that big, Francesco, to untangle that fucking thing. And that's the reality of it. So many of these things are subjective that all you can do, and all AI should do, is to point out things that are happening. And if there are historical arguments about numbers and data, and before war happens, like a Second World War, I don't know about your A-level education, but there was a good 3 months of explaining to us the whys and wherefores that led up to that. And no one ever said England were perfect and Germany were evil doing that. They just said what happened. That's all you need. You can say that fascism is a government which depends on, which is based around the total restriction of people's rights as a virtue. Do you understand that, Johnny? Oh, what you mean you have to? Yes, you have to. That's what fascism is. Oh, right. And then their little brain might quickly go to understanding how a government, which is not right or left, might do that itself just by insisting on things happening. And that is, postmodern governments don't have to be right or left. They tend to give them some colour. But the reality is, Britain right now, our country, appears to have a totalitarian government who will never ever call themselves that. Because only people in prison for what they've said online, which is the place we started this chat at.
Which is crazy. It's insane. They're arresting old ladies for Facebook posts like, what are we doing here? Yeah. There's real crime out there. There's like London, there's a knife attack, I don't know, every minute, every 7 minutes, whatever the statistic.
Yeah. It's a conviction box tick for, it's not the policeman's fault a lot of the time. They have to fulfill these things that come through in their memos. We need a few more of these policemen in order that you will get your promotion and that our force will be looking better. All right, I'll go and do that then. And they'll go and do that because they're either getting the grants because of it into their police station, because of the kind of things that have been pushed by both the Labour and the Conservatives. The Conservatives were just guilty of it over 14 years, but the difference is that the Labour are proud of it. But the Conservatives saying, so we have to do this. But with Labour, they're like, yes, we're going to do this, and it's for the good of the country. And then the rump of the country goes, what on earth have we just voted in? And that's where we are now, a year later, watching Starmer wriggle like.
Yes, all right, Sean, last question. What is it that you want to be remembered?
Painter. I love painting. If anybody's watching or listening, then that's a painting of mine behind me.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah.
Since COVID, I've had a real renaissance of this. I'm really enjoying it. It's what I went to university 20 years ago, but I haven't really touched it until COVID. Since then, I haven't stopped. So if anyone says, Sean Parker, yeah, you're a bit of a painter, teach me, that's enough. And I don't actually care about how I'm remembered. I just want to, I'm not sure. I don't think about it very much, but I know I like making good work. And that painting's good work, and this podcast is good work. And that's what I'm all about. I hope it's good work.
It is good work, yeah. Right. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for being in the podcast.
Thank you, Francesco. Great time.